Percent Podcast.
Okay, we're live. This is Matthew, and I'm back with another special interview with my dude Rizzle on the Matthew and Rizzle Show. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with legendary community figure and presence in the Ethereum ecosystem, Simona Pop, about her career so far and her most recent project that she's been working with that all of you ETH heads should be familiar with, known as Status, which is a peer-to-peer messenger, crypto wallet, Web3 browser, basically the Swiss Army knife of the Web3 world. So I'm really excited to dig into all of that and more. So welcome to the show, Simona.
Thank you so much, guys. And great to be here. Excited.
Same here. So I think a good way to get started would be to hear your intro. I know you've been around the block and more in the Ethereum world. You started off, as far as I know of, with Bounties Network, and then you're over at Petbo, and then now you're at Status. So I'm curious actually to hear the entire background, how you found your way into the Ethereum crypto world, and then how you got to Status.
Of course. So I think I'm still one of those rare beasts in the space that isn't of a dev background, and I'm not necessarily a technical contributor to the space, but what I, let's say, lack in the technical prowess, I make up for it in the communication side and the ideation strategy side of things. So for me, the journey was very swift once I went down the blockchain rabbit hole. The decision, once I realized that there were very valuable redesign mechanisms that were already at play by certain projects already live and already doing work, was incredibly clear. So I knew that I had to get involved. And before kind of taking the dive, deciding to dive in, I was working in comms for a tech startup in London, and they were kind of experimenting with or looking at technologies to essentially improve the whole supply chain piece. And because of that, I started researching the blockchain space and seeing, okay, what was happening there, what were the benefits of it, and so on. And like I said, very swiftly, a link turned into another link and turned into 10. And I essentially found some information about Viant, currently Trium, which was the consensus funded project that essentially focuses on supply chain, because that's kind of the angle that I started my research from. And then from there, I just started looking into all of the other projects that Consensus was funding. And so ended up getting to know the Bounties Network, getting to know Mark. He had just started the project at the end of 2017, creating the Standard Bounties protocol. And then I came on board at the very beginning of 2018 and essentially set out to really explore the different and very varied applications of bounties across verticals, and doing it very consciously from the perspective of, I know that there is a lot of value that can be kind of taken from that very, very simple format of a bounty and applied to very broad use cases. So I very much wanted to go broad use case wise, where I know that a lot of listeners will be much more familiar with Gitcoin. Gitcoin essentially built their bounties offering on top of our protocol and went deep on code bounties. And so we decided to go very broad on all sorts of other bounties, including art, research, social and environmental impact. And I think that's where the penny started really dropping in us doing a lot of real world pilots and real world projects to essentially prove out the model.
When you're talking about bounties, can you give like a couple super basic examples of what a bounty is and what it looks like?
Yeah, of course. So a bounty in its most simple definition is a task. It's a task that somebody sets up or creates. It could be an organization, it could be an individual, and it requires it has some requirements, and the completion of it releases a reward. Because we are in the Ethereum space, that reward is either ETH or any ERC20 token. So it's a very, very simple and therefore very flexible kind of format.
So At the risk of sort of bastardizing your project and oversimplifying it like drastically, is this like essentially like crypto Fiverr, but more intricate and nuanced and a wider range of applications? Like, is that somewhat in the same ballpark of comparison?
It is, yes. What you would, let's say, want to include in that is because it has certain requirements are essentially baked into the contract, you have a little bit more of a more responsible flow for both parties versus Fiverr. And also when the bounty is created, you have to load it with money. So you cannot put up a bounty that is devoid of funds. So for people who are, let's say, fulfilling bounties, they would know that there is money there for the payment, right? So versus, yes, let's say I promise you that I'm going to pay you this much, you can see that the funds are in there, right? In the contract.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, that makes it much more relieving to know that if you're going to complete a task that you're actually going to get paid for it. Who uses it the most? I mean, is it like a pretty widespread, or what's pretty much the demographic that has been utilizing it mostly?
Honestly, it's very much been something that we used to use for a lot of the engagement pieces within the ecosystem. So the project actually got put on hold at the beginning of this year, where it's still live, it still exists, but no more work is being done on it. But prior to that, we used to essentially use bounties to incentivize certain actions, certain behaviors, certain involvements, typically around the event circuit within the ecosystem, but also a lot of bounties, because they weren't necessarily technical, they would be very, very suitable for newcomers. And the model for that was this earn versus buy crypto, which was very, very appealing, particularly once you go out of, let's say, the staple regions where crypto is being used to areas where you might not get access to an exchange, or it may not be as straightforward. And so this earn instead of buy became a very, very big kind of push for the bounties that we were hosting, which again, most of them were non-technical. And again, it was one of the reasons why these social and environmental impact bounties were so successful, because we were asking people essentially in one of them to, pick up trash, and we would reward them with DAI, or plant a tree, and again, we would reward them with crypto. And I think that ability to do something that is not only, in line with, let's say, your desire to help the environment, but also an opportunity for you to earn an alternative to whatever means of income you had at the time, was, again, incredibly appealing.
Yeah, you just kind of talked about it, but the most memorable bounty for me from back in the day of the Bounties Network was that, I guess it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, the beach cleanup that
Yes.
Bounties Network kind of facilitated to great effect. Yeah. And I thought that was like a really cool glimpse at the power of bounties in this more social environmental context. But from Bounties Network,
it was definitely the most famous one we ever did.
Totally.
So.
And then from Bounties Network, you hopped over to Peppo for a short while, but we can talk about that later, but I really want to get into Status, where you're currently at now. So
that's right.
I guess you can tell folks what your role is there now. And then I think it would be cool to go back in time to the beginning of Status, since it's one of these OG projects in the Ethereum space, to talk about maybe the big ICO in 2017, bringing like $100 million, and then like what it set out to do and what it's doing today. I think that'd be a real cool conversation to get into.
Sure. So my relationship with Status has kind of been like, I only started with them as head of community this month, but we've partnered on many, many different projects throughout these past 3 years. And it's been really exciting, because it was actually one of the first partnerships that I did with Bounties Network was with Status, right? Because I needed people to be able to access the Bounties Network, and Status was one of the few mobile wallets at the time. And DApp browser. And so it made a lot of sense for us to partner so that people could access Bounties Network via Status. And in terms of what we're aiming to do, and you're right, it is it is very much an OG project, and it's coming into its third, almost fourth year soon. And I think the main thing to say about them, and one of the things that I've always admired and liked about Status as a project and the team, is just how committed to their mission they are. And that mission is very much focused on decentralization, focused on privacy, focused on building things with those values at the core. And really staying very, very true to that North Star, which is hard because when you're building something completely new, and this is something that I've kind of talked about many times, we're building things that are so incredibly new, yet we're measured with old kind of Web 2 metrics, that it's very, very hard for a lot of projects to be able to live to those measurements that people are imposing on them, and also make sure that they are, again, building what we are all aiming to build, which is a completely different system to what we have now. And it's very hard because it's almost like we have one foot in two different boats, and you have to keep on, keep advancing in that situation. And as far as Status is concerned, it's that thing where Yaniv tweeted the other day, and actually this really resonated. It's the short-term people, who are playing those short-term games and so on, are very easy to spot. And we're currently seeing them all over the place, right? In the space, particularly in DeFi. But you're kind of thinking, okay, it's the people who played the long game, the decentralization game, and staying true to that are in it for the long haul, right? And that's not an easy feat, because you have to build everything from scratch to be able to build with those values in mind and with that decentralization as your core. And so, you have these situations where people, and it's something that people don't really remember or don't realize just how much Status is actually built. Because yes, we are saying, yes, it's 3 years, but you have to remember that it's genuinely about 2 years of building the app, a hardware wallet, dApp store, dApp browser, fiat crypto exchange, decentralized funding, plus the developer tooling and everything else. That's a lot of work, Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that for a long time, particularly in the past, say, year, the team has just been heads down with all of this stuff and making sure that things are improved, and making sure that, the chat is a lot more usable, and making sure that the dApp store is a lot better structured and so on. People, it's easy to lose sight of that, of just how much is, those icebergs, and you see just the top, there's so much underneath, right? So much. And I think, one of my goals is certainly to not necessarily remind people of that, but really make sure that Status is viewed and used as what it is, which is a gateway to Ethereum. For newcomers, you have all of these different aspects, let's say pathways, in one place. You have the wallet, you have the dApp browser, and you have the chat. You can essentially exchange value across all of these different avenues, right? You can converse privacy first. If you look at the comparisons between the privacy and the security that Status brings compared to other messaging platforms, it's ridiculous. Being able to transact, again, with that privacy in mind. Being able to browse things on iOS and Android in a lot of different countries, because this, again, is something that, in terms of accessibility, there's a lot of work to be done regarding what tools are available in what countries. And again, when you go out of your typical, States, Western Europe, and some Southeast Asia, you start getting into accessibility problems. In the dApp stores, in the app stores, sorry. Yeah, there I go, saying dApp instead of app already.
Don't dApp is verboten these days. It's one of the words that people don't want to say anymore. And there definitely is an iceberg quality to Status. For the longest time for me in my mind, I had thought about it as a wallet, but then it seems like these days there's definitely more of a push, it feels like, or at least that's what I'm seeing within Twitter, focused on the chat, the messenger aspect of Status. And that's definitely a strong advantage, because when you come at it and come into Status as a user, you see that there's much more behind it. But in terms of, I guess, capturing what the best way to sell it or communicate it to the largest amount of people, I feel like that's probably like a huge challenge, right? And as every project in the space is at some point or other going to have to march the road, hopefully, to mass adoption, that communicating the key selling point is going to be major, right? Getting that right. So in that context, as we're trying to onboard more folks into this space, it seems like Status could be well positioned to bring in a lot of those crowds. So in that aspect, like, what is the selling point to folks that are not necessarily into crypto right now? If they download Status, like what is the key selling point for them to do that at this point?
So I think one of the main advantages of having the communication piece as well, so the chat, is that you don't have transactions there. Right? So you can essentially use a decentralized blockchain application without it costing you. And so I think with a lot of onboarding, particularly again for people who do not hold crypto, it's a very, very useful piece to essentially lead them then through the avenues to entry. And one of the things that I'm very, most people will know this about me, I'm very, very passionate about the educational piece. Being able to lead people through the different steps required to do something in Ethereum, to interact with something, is very, very important. Because what we're doing right now is essentially people know there's something going on, but there isn't a clear door, there isn't a clear path. There isn't let's say, an opportunity for them to essentially access something and get the opportunity to try and test different things or take different avenues. It's all a little bit disjointed. So what my goal and view with Status is that you'll be able to have a lot of these interactions in one place, which used to be very frustrating, for instance, for me when I would try to, and this is me as a co-founder of an application, I would have to get people to download a wallet, then send them somewhere else, then they would have to potentially go and buy some crypto somewhere else, then come back. Then there's the confusion about all the different wallets, like what are they, why are they different, and so on. Where if you just do one action of downloading one app, that can give you the opportunity to do, let's say, 4 motions from that one or more, depending on like how you progress and what you end up doing and so on. So one of the very interesting things that we're doing in prep for the HCPP this year, it's happening in Prague, we're doing a series of AMAs within Status with some of the speakers, right? They're going to be at the Institute of Crypto Anarchy in Prague in October. We're going to do some AMAs in the lead up to the conference. It gives people that opportunity to not just come in and potentially, access valuable information and have access to these speakers, but also then have that to a space that allows them to perform a lot of different other actions within crypto, let's say.
So I really like the idea of everything all in one place and, central locations, even if it's a centralized location for decentralized things.
Right.
You had mentioned, there are certain cost barriers that are prohibitive for some people. And you had mentioned the wallet situation being somewhat disjointed. I'm just sort of curious, like, based on what you've seen, and I guess you can like talk trash on other projects if you want, but you don't have to name names. I'm just sort of curious, like what are like the big bottlenecks of competitive projects or other projects who are seeking to do like some of the same type of thing? It seems like you guys are very confident that you've got like a certain amount of these things done correctly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what are the main bottlenecks in similar projects?
I think for me, the main piece is the privacy piece.
Okay.
And we're seeing a lot of this now with, the protests happening everywhere. You see a lot of coverage around, okay, how do you protect yourself and your data when you are out expressing, let's say, a political view? But not just that. We had recently, I think it was the European Commission, who essentially released a statement saying privacy is a human right and it should be treated that way. But everything that has happened just in Web 2 tech has kind of completely desensitized us to the importance of that privacy and what that brings with it. And so I think for me, the fact that we do not ask for emails or phone numbers is a massive step towards that privacy being a human right. Again, it's a lot easier to ask for those things because that is the natural flow that people are used to, right? When they either do one or the other or both. But being able to maintain that privacy level, being able to, let's say, do things like maintain anonymity globally, but be able to store information locally, like names, right? I could save you guys in my status under your actual names, but they would be saved locally. I wouldn't compromise your anonymity across the app, right? And so these little fine differences are actually very, very meaningful and very powerful when we look at things from the perspective that privacy is actually a human right. It's just that we've been lulled into this like, sure, take everything because that's just the way it is. It's that conscious step away from the way things are and towards, okay, maybe this is the way things should be. If we are conscious of ownership, personal ownership of data, privacy, security, and that peer-to-peer decentralized situation.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that's obviously so powerful, and that privacy preserving, like truly you can rely on that aspect to a really high degree. It's really important when you need it. But before that, I feel like a lot of people discount it. But then when they need it, it's kind of too late and they're already locked up and the secret police have already like pounding on their door or something like that. But having that baked in from day one, I think that's really, really smart. To me, like as a regular user and putting myself in a regular user's shoes, it's like that's important, but it's not like something that would sell me. Sort of what we were talking about earlier with bounty networks and that use to earn or just like a casual use. Yeah. Perform a task, earn money is something that's really adjacent to what Status has. It like signing up for an account as using the messenger as the onboarding ramp. It then opens up this avenue for you to have this identity and build an identity in this Web3 world where your financial transactions, your receipts start to add up and form this kind of identity for you. But then you have this direct access to, for example, like Axie Infinity, a game that like, its whole conceit is to play and earn money with it, right? And it seems like Status is right there. And I'm wondering if there's any initiatives or partnerships on the roadmap for Status to kind of partner with games like Axie Infinity, where people that are onboarded to Status potentially could have 3 Axies in their wallet so they can start earning as they play that game right away, to kind of like onboard them into the powerful ecosystem that Ethereum and Web3 are provisioning in the background.
Yeah, 100%. And because you mentioned partnerships, I think it's one of the main avenues that I see us as an ecosystem progressing, right? These collaborations and putting our ideas and our resources together to advance the whole ecosystem, right? I'm very much of a tide lifts all boats type of community builder. And I think that is how we advance this. So partnerships, 100%. It's kind of my modus operandi. I've always looked at what are the different connections and partnerships that will deliver the most value. And I think that is the thing that everything boils down to. It's that value. Does this particular thing deliver value to the people using it? And how can you deliver more value than what they have access to right now? And being able to make decisions based on that, I think, particularly with what you're saying, having those partnerships and creating those opportunities for the user. Because at the end of the day, that is what, certainly for me, what blockchain is all about. It enables choice and opportunity where, let's say right now, there is limited access to that. And being able to offer these different avenues for people coming in to not just do a one and done, yes, download something and then there's nothing else you can do, because you have to go and do all of these other and jump through all of these other 10,000 hoops for you to be able to do anything, or understand the depths of what we're all doing here in our little corner of the internet, is what will make that difference, right? Being able to offer opportunities to say, okay, here's how you DeFi, but here's how you DeFi responsibly. Here are some options for you. Here are some games that you can play. And actually, funnily enough, I was just pinging Axie and saying, hey guys, let's figure out some cool collaboration opportunities. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, being able to offer those opportunities, I think, and again, being able to point people towards them all within one place becomes something that is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Right? Because I'm not asking them to go again through all of these different hurdles. It's, okay, you're here, here's where you can go. And imagine it almost like, you know, those maps in amusement parks or in shopping malls. You are here, and here's all of the other things that where you can go, depending on what you want to do. That's kind of how Status positions itself, right? It's the gateway towards all of this stuff that you could be doing. And that's communicating safely, privately. That's transacting value through the wallet, being able to send people tokens literally in the chat, and exploring all of the different applications that are live, that are, you know, depending on your interests, depending on what you want to do, depending on what you're interested in. And absolutely, that earning opportunity becomes very natural progress, because, and these past few years have definitely shown me that incentives are incredibly powerful. And nobody is saying that we should sub intrinsic motivation for extrinsic motivation, because these are, again, conversations that we've always had. Nobody is saying subbing them and paying people for everything. But being able to cut out that step of people buying crypto, especially when it isn't something that's easy to do, is very, very important and valuable. And it's a shortcut. You're removing all of these steps, which are actually very irksome, for lack of a better word.
I'd be really interested to hear, you know, you've mentioned that you guys are like an OG project, and with that like comes a lot of perspective over the past couple of years. And I feel like you guys came on the upswing when everyone thought everything was, you know, an absolutely genius project. And then, you know, it's been like sort of a dumpster fire and a bloodbath for the past couple of years, while all these projects are just essentially dying out because they either were like you were saying, sort of a flash in the pan, or it didn't have like a very clear long-term vision. So, and now I guess the sense is, or the general consensus is, that we're somewhat seeing, you know, we're on the upswing of like the downward cycle and everything. But who has been, you know, I know collaborations have been at the heart of this project and everything. Are a lot of new people starting to take interest? Has the interest like been there through the ebbs and flows of the crypto rise and falls of the past few years? Or what's sort of been like the vibe from, you know, the very beginning throughout the course of the history of this project?
Do you mean whose interest? Do you mean newcomers or?
Yeah. Was it very difficult, say, the past couple of years up until like this last upswing in crypto interest and prices? Was it difficult to maintain collaborations and interest, or did you always have like a pretty strong contingency of people who believed in this project? Because I feel like, you know, 2019, pretty much everyone except for like people who really believed in their stuff threw in the towel at that point. And clearly you guys did not.
Yeah. I think one of the main things, differentiator potentially, is that dedication to what you're doing. And I think for me personally, and this is something that I've obviously found in Status as well, is that dedication to the long game. Because this isn't about a revolution as much as it's about an evolution.
Ooh, I like that.
What we're all doing here, right? And evolution takes a little bit of time. And it's actually not bad that it takes a little bit of time, because you can learn from the things that you do and then do them better. Or you can understand what it is like for the people using what you're building and understanding why they're using it, what benefits it brings, or what annoyances it brings, or whether it brings value at all. And being able to understand those things comes with playing that long game and testing things out and making sure that you understand your users and your community to be able to then build things together. Because again, this should not be for the few who can use things because they get them straight away and they're able to just go and get involved in a project that's existed for 24 hours. And again, I'm not saying I love experimentation and it's great and it's wonderful because it teaches us a lot of things. But it's not the way you completely redesign social and economical structures, or the way communities work, or the way individuals are able to organize themselves. Like, that's not going to happen in a short span of time. And so I think for the people in this ecosystem, and certainly the people coming into this ecosystem who understand the change is a process, those are the ones that will keep that interest and will keep that work going until we get there, until we evolve there, rather, you know?
Where in the course of evolution, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just curious. I'm going to assume this is going to be a constant evolution, but in terms of like trying to get most of this stuff where you want it to be, do you guys feel like you're there, or are there any like big pieces that you really want to put in place before, you start fine tuning things?
So I think we've been fine-tuning things for a while, certainly from that perspective of accessibility and usability, because again, you have to, going back to that motivation of how do you bring value, it's the motivation that essentially helps shape the future and helps refine things and so on. There's a whole bunch of things that the team is working on in terms of that usability with regards to the chat, being able to have things like avatars in there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, being able to save identities locally. So always with the values of decentralization, privacy, and security always in mind, right? And how can we make it more usable, a lot friendlier, but still keeping those core elements in. And I think from even things like stickers, right? You can now do images, and there's a whole bunch of stickers that are accessible in the chats, which again, like my crypto just launched some of Taylor, which were excellent. We're planning some others. Actually, stay tuned for some really interesting thoughts we had about in prep for DEF CON in Colombia and so on. So I think there's always things that we can work on. Like, in fact, earlier today, we were having all of these spammers in the channels, right? So that immediately is, okay, how do you manage that when you're talking about a completely decentralized piece? And how do you essentially create and adjust to these things that do happen whilst keeping your values there at all times, right? So I think it's an iterative process. And I think the more we're gonna launch a lot of new, let's say, IRL projects, which again, you'll hear about very soon, the more we're going to learn how to do these things better, because we're going to get a lot of different types of feedback. For instance, one of the main things that we're looking at for Latin America is the fact that, particularly in Brazil, let's say, it's the use of mobile phones versus laptops and computers. right? And if you have something that is mobile first, that's going to immediately be something that plays into the natural usage of a technology already, right? So the proposition technically should be a lot more appealing because it's already going on the hardware that people are using on their in day-to-day life, right? So again, we're going to learn a lot. We're going to see a lot of the ways in which different audiences and different users and different communities use this particular app. And that's the thing that really, really interests me. Like, how can we, again, be that piece that enables them to transact value, whether it's through communication, through token transfers, or through exploring all of the different Web3 apps.
Yeah. The way that Status will interact with all these various communities, I think is one of the most interesting open experiments.
I agree.
The ecosystem. And you had mentioned...
I'm super excited.
Same. You had mentioned that the scam account issue that had popped up today, and then immediately Vitalik kind of chimed in with some suggestions how you can solve that. And then a bunch of people were talking. Dr. Corey Petty chimed in from Status side, just talking about pros and cons of different approaches. And I mean, that speaks to like a really vibrant and healthy, in particular, like developer community. I know that there's other sub communities that are using Status. So I'm curious if there's any way you can either break down the types of communities that are using Status in any meaningful number, or even talk about like just the general number of users that are using it. And then if you can weave in, if this is applicable, how the SNT, the Status Network Token, may be involved in kind of incentivizing more of this community growth and use of Status. I'd be interested to hear those two sides of the book.
Sure. So I think the main... like what we're seeing right now is because it's so easy to create public chats, right, within Status. We're seeing some of the main kind of channels, which is the general chat, and then you have one on crypto, and then you have like introductions and one around dApps and music, like your typical kind of community channels that you would find in your, let's say, typical online communities. But what we're seeing as well is a lot of channels that are regional, right? So you've got Status Brazil. We're looking at all of the different ways in which people can interact with each other in their native language. Because this is, again, something that's incredibly, incredibly important when you are building something that it is accessible for everybody and you don't require people to speak a foreign language to be able to access what you're doing. So this kind of focus on all the different regional communities and having those chats where people can ask their questions and can interact with each other and so on, we're seeing a real boom in those. And the more we will focus on the educational side of things, we're also looking at some very, very interesting dynamics, in fact, that again we'll reveal very soon, where you can actually create, support channels for people from different regions speaking in different languages that they can again use to explore the ecosystem, right? Because then there is a port of call for them to be able to go and interact with people who are from the region, who are able to explain things in their native language, and then be able to explore things in a much more comfortable, much more natural way. And so I think from that perspective, again, it lends itself very, very well to this ability to employ communication in the discovery of Web3. The fact that you can also have private chats, it's up to 10 people, but, we're used to these small groups, right? Clubhouse and these kind of smaller, more intimate conversations that can be done privately as well. So what we're seeing again is potentially these private groups where people can pay each other. Let's say, in my mind, I'm seeing it as a way to, hey, we've all been out for a meal. Let me pay you straight in the chat real quick, right? That's, again, this whole thing of being able to utilize something and transact value regardless of what country you are in. Because again, so many times being in the ecosystem, being part of a group of global friends, when we have had meals out, it's always, oh, okay, well, how do I pay you back? Do you have PayPal? No, because I'm American, I have Venmo, or vice versa. And it's always, it kind of ends up in, oh, just never mind, get me next time, right? So being able to, again, have these transactions that happen in a much quicker, more efficient way, very, very interesting and potentially very beneficial. So with S&T, what you can do right now is obviously get your ENS name, right, for your chat so that you are recognizable. In fact, Vitalik has his, and I know a lot of people coming in have kind of, interacted with him, which to their great delight. And in fact, in the beginning, weren't necessarily sure that it was the Vitalik. Right? That's a very, very simple thing that you can do with S&T straight off the bat. And then with the stickers that I mentioned earlier, what we have done before are a series of competitions that artists produced series of stickers where they're able to then earn, right, for those stickers. So you can sell them. So when you go into the chat, if you want to add a sticker pack, some are free and some cost money. Now, that money goes to the person who created those stickers. And so again, from an earning perspective, you could create something like that and then earn S&T each time a person adds your stickers to their status, right, and starts using them. Being able to, again, transact with the token, being able to reward people with S&T. Again, we've run many of these different competitions, and we used to do bounties with status paying in S&T, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of interesting applications for transacting value with a native token to that community. But of course, it supports any ERC20. So again, you have that multitude of options in terms of value within the same place.
Simona, it's awesome to have a project on here that has such high ambitions and really, really like big picture focused. I feel like really cool fly-by-night projects are really cool, like very nuanced projects. And this seems like it's got a little bit of everything. I mean, particularly with the nuances that you were just mentioning, I feel like sometimes we have projects on here that just do nuances similar to those. And those are cool too, but the breadth of this project is pretty amazing, what you guys have set out to accomplish. We're always interested, anytime we have someone on the show here, to sort of, take a peek inside of your crypto wallet and see what you're playing around with on the side, or what sort of like little games or projects that are unrelated to yours that you've been tinkering around with.
Oh my goodness. I have many, many things in my wallet. Anything from S&T to obviously ETH to Boost, which was the token that we co-created with UNICEF last year. I have CDAI, I have CETH, I have USDC, I have PLDAI, I have RDAI. What else do I have? I have an infinite amount of love tokens that Gonzalo from Consensus Diligence created in 2018. And in terms of all of the different things that I'm doing, I think a really interesting conversation obviously is around DeFi and all of the experiments that have been going on recently. And the biggest and most interesting piece for me was the idea of, and I know that you would have seen this, for Yearn and Yam to essentially divert some of those funds towards public goods funding and towards, let's say, worthy causes. And that interests me a great deal. And so what I've been doing is I've been playing around with DeFi and the whole yield farming situation to essentially understand the mechanics of it and understand how it might become something that can be used, let's say, in a DAO dynamic where you could use it as an earning or a crowdsourcing funding opportunity and then funneling money towards different causes and towards different, let's say, greater good mechanisms. So that interests me a great deal. And like I say, I've been playing around with Yearn, you can get Uniswap as well. So there's a whole bunch of activity happening on that in the past 2-3 days.
Yeah, that's definitely a super interesting area for these DeFi projects in particular that are attracting all this attention and most importantly, all this liquidity for these projects to divert even a portion of the liquidity that's coming through them to a public service, like a Gitcoin or something like that. That's really, really fascinating area.
I mean, that's the type of use case I'm after, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the type of, hey, here is an impactful dynamic right here. That's the type of thing that I very much believe crypto opens up. That potential.
Totally. So. It's like, I mean, in my mind, some of these DeFi projects are akin to casinos, right? And for good or bad. I'm not passing a value judgment. I'm just saying it is sort of like a casino. You're kind of going in there. You're hoping that you're not getting in too late. You're hoping that the house doesn't fold on you or whatever. Yeah. But just like casinos in real life have these taxes that you take the revenue and you're able to funnel them back into like positive public services, whether that's education or infrastructure projects. It seems like in crypto to build out these other valuable infrastructure plays or whatever you want to say, things that may not have initial like traction when it comes to revenue early on, funneling some of that revenue from these casino-like projects makes total sense. And I hope I'm sure we're going to see a whole slew of these DeFi projects pop up heading forward. I mean, it seems like every other day a new one pops up. Last week it was sushi, and then there's cream finance that's on the horizon right now. That's looking really interesting. So hopefully we're able to kind of like all come together to kind of share that growing pie that those projects are helping to grow for better or worse.
Right, exactly. And I think we should definitely, again, make sure that we learn from all of these, let's say, dramatics, never a dull moment right now, but making sure that we learn from these and making sure that the next iteration that we build has considerations for, let's say, the longer term benefits versus the short, right? Again, going back to the long game. Let's make sure that, yes, we play these short-term games, but the long ones and really the ones that should be caring about, if we are honest about wanting to usher in, a better way and a way that serves most versus few. They are the lessons that we need to make sure that we then implement in future iterations and designing things with everybody in mind versus, again, the select few.
There we go. That's perfect. I think that's the perfect place to begin to wrap up to on this really interesting conversation. But before we do go, I want to make sure I give you the chance to shout out all the channels that folks should be following you and Status at. And if there's any upcoming events that people need to mark their calendars for, this would be the perfect time to let folks know what they should be looking forward to.
Great. So I'm on Twitter. It's just sim_pop. You have a link to my status in there. So on the Twitter profile, so you can just click and it will take you to the status chat and we can start chatting. Obviously, download Status if you haven't already. I've been doing all of my DeFiing via Status, and I'm pleased to say that most of them have a mobile responsive interface. So I've been able to do a lot of the different interacting with all the different DeFi protocols and DeFi offerings through my mobile, which has been great. Give it a go. Obviously, Status is the main channel. It's just #status. Hop in there. And then coming up, we have got this HCPP event, which again will be live in Prague, so in person in Prague, but I can't travel over there, and I know a lot of people can't, but it will all be online. And it's the Hacker Congress of 2020, and there are some amazing speakers, which again, like Douglas Rushkoff and some amazing people like Eric S. Raymond. Like, it's going to be really, really interesting lineup, and hopefully 2 or 3 of the speakers will also join us in some Status AMAs, which we'll announce on Twitter. So keep an eye on that, but they will happen in the main #Status channel in the app. And yeah, those are the main ones. And then again, stay tuned. There's a lot of interesting partnerships coming up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and talk about your career so far, and then all the amazing things going on over at Status, and just for helping to cultivate a healthy, diverse, and growing community in this space. You're such a bright light and a beacon. So really excited to have you keep doing what you're doing. And yeah, just keep creating and doing good things, Simona. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.
Podcast. Podcast. Podcast.